I. Right, well, hello everybody. My name is Ben, or Lol McShiz. I'm the ecosystem lead for Hydra DX, and today I'm going to be talking about the Hydra DX Omnipool and how it is changing the game for Treasury liquidity management. So, why don't we start with the question of what is the Hydra DX Omnipool? So in the first part of this presentation, I'm going to lay out the fundamental features of the Omnipool, breaking it down before sort of going into how they can be leveraged by DAOs and protocol treasuries to their advantage. So Hydra DX is a next-gen DeFi protocol, which is designed essentially to bring a notion of liquidity to Polkadot. So our tool for the job is the Omnipool, which in basic terms is an automated market maker, which unlocks unparalleled efficiencies by putting all assets in a single pool. So we chose to build on Polkadot, amongst many other things, for the amazing benefits such as shared security, interoperability, and how easy it is to fully decentralize due to the self-execute and autonomous governance, right? So these features are all built in from the base layer upwards, which means that we, as the developers of Hydra, were able to focus on one thing, which is just creating an environment that offers the most capital efficient swaps possible. So the design of the Omnipool empowers single-sided liquidity provisioning. So anyone can provide liquidity just for the asset they want to, and the Omnipool takes care of the rest. So there's no need to sell half of your position for another asset in an LP to pair with it. That's sort of all done on the back. You don't need to do that. So this is made possible by our hub token learner. Essentially, when an asset is provided to the Omnipool, the equivalent amount of learner is minted by the protocol. And when the liquidity is removed, the equivalent amount of learner is burned. So there's no artificial selling of a token or anything to get that as a pair. So by putting an end to the liquidity fragmentation, the Omnipool makes trading super efficient, right? So thanks to lower price impact and less hops, traders get to enjoy capital efficiency gains that scale further and further with TVL. So your typical situation, normal conventional AMM, liquidity gets fragmented across loads of different pools, right? So because all those assets route through the same asset learner, you make direct swaps between two assets, and it eliminates the need for these multi-stage hops. So let's just, as an example, say that I'm a giga whale. Let's say I'm Hank. I've got $10 million worth of DOT, and I want to provide liquidity against 5 other assets. So in a conventional AMM, I need to split that liquidity across multiple pools, obviously balance them however, but you'd say on average, you're looking at $2 million worth of DOT liquidity in each pool, right? Whereas in the Omnipool, I just yeet in $10 million of DOT into the Omnipool, and that same $10 million is against all other assets in the Omnipool. So it doesn't take a lot to realize that these efficiencies sort of like scales very, very quickly as the number of assets grow and grow, right? Back to the previous slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So impermanent loss. So the Omnipool is uniquely structured to minimize, in some ways, impermanent loss, right? So due to the relationship between all assets and the hub token learner, every trade, you pay a trade fee like you would on every other DEX. It's broken into 2 parts, the asset fee and the protocol fee. So this protocol fee is paid from the trade in learner, and under certain conditions that's burned. This burning is basically leads to mean reversion of learner over time, thus reducing impermanent loss for the pool overall. Now, the number one means of compensating for impermanent loss typically is through trade fees, and soon we'll be launching our dynamic trade fees, which essentially lead to higher fees when LPs are most likely to suffer from impermanent loss, whilst not arbitrarily increasing them the rest of the time during quieter periods, because obviously then nobody would trade because you're charging too much for fees, and then LPs get super wrecked, right? We know that impermanent loss is experienced the most when price volatility is at its highest. and is exacerbated by LPs and market makers rugging their liquidity in a race to exit type scenario. So in the Omnipool, we currently have $8 million worth of protocol and liquidity inside the Omnipool, with a further $7 million worth awaiting deployment. So this will act as a liquidity provider of last resort. That is, Omnipool essentially won't dump on your heads. This provides some assurance to LPs that essentially they won't be left holding the bag next time the bears decide to make their move, and it helps us to maintain an orderly market. The Omnipool also enjoys state-of-the-art security. We've been through the usual multiple audits on the code. We've got a generous bug bounty program in place to incentivize a responsible disclosure of any vulnerabilities. But besides that, we're always looking at additional protective mechanisms in the Omnipool. So we have liquidity caps, withdrawal fees, in-block trade limits, circuit breakers, which all work together to keep your liquidity safe. We're also always adding new features. So as I said, dynamic fees will help to improve this security, and an XCM rate limiter, which we're working on at the moment, will also help to prevent that those scenarios that you sort of try to avoid at all times in an AMM. So in crypto, we often talk about onboarding the next 1 billion users, whilst obviously one of the biggest memes is that we seemingly hate users, making the onboarding experience unnecessarily clunky. So Hydra transaction fees are payable in any registered asset, and the asset is automatically selected as the first token that a user sends onto the network, and that can be changed at any time. So the users are never left bricked. There's no Discord first needed. There's no admin, please give HDX the gas. We don't agree with unnecessary friction for users. So for example, if a feature doesn't require a connected wallet, we're not going to ping you with endless pop-ups asking you to please connect to your wallet, because that's just annoying and unnecessary, right? It's also worth noting that in our UI, it's widely understood that the greatest growth opportunity in Web3 will be from developing countries, which are overwhelmingly mobile users. So our entire UX flow is developed with mobile users in mind, and the UI is dynamically responsive to any screen size. So it works on fantastic super apps like Nodle Wallet, right? But what does this mean for treasuries and DAOs, right? Like, no one knows what it means. But no, really, how can we utilize these features best, or how can treasuries utilize these features best, right? So firstly, let's talk about self-custody. So the last few years have shown us again and again and again that trusting third parties to custody your funds is a recipe for disaster, right? LPing into the Omnipool is entirely non-custodial, meaning you maintain custody of your assets at all times. Through the power of Substrate and XCM, protocols can trustlessly provide their assets and liquidity to the Omnipool. Consider some of the alternatives available today. Paying to list tokens on a centralized exchange, handing over tokens to market makers to market make on the behalf of the project, paying them for the privilege of doing so, probably also giving them a bunch of cheap options to buy those assets if it falls in their favor in the future, if they've pumped it to infinity or whatever. That's a lot of cost that could potentially be utilized for development. Even if we look at decentralized alternatives, a conventional Uniswap style DEX requires liquidity for a second asset. So if you have, we will know that a project typically has an abundance of its own token, but another asset comes with as its own a lot of costs. So Omnipool, you provide liquidity only for that single asset, which means you only need to deposit that single asset. We're ahead on the slides, but yeah, better economics. Okay, so by maintaining custody of these assets and LPing them into the Omnipool, it also gives, it unlocks the potential for treasuries and DAOs to earn trading fees on their liquidity. And in future, we're looking at mechanisms of how we can allow DAOs to gradually diversify that into other assets rather than just compounding their own token. It's also worth looking at planned distributions for the project. Like, you think a lot of the time on the tokenomics, you see a big portion of supply for market making or liquidity incentives. Those can be repurposed for other initiatives. So we talked earlier about how all assets sit in a single pool, the Omnipool. This means that they instantly tradable against all other assets in the Omnipool. So as soon as a Treasury or DAO provides its token, it's immediately tradable against all other assets in the Omnipool. So right now that's HDX, DOT, DAI, native USDT, wrapped ETH, wrapped Bitcoin, IBTC, and ZTG, with many more on the way, hopefully soon TM. So how does it work? Very few simple steps. The diagram sort of paints it quite well, but step one, protocol governance approves and executes a proposal to send their token via XCM to the HydraDX Omnipool account. Now, this is a system account with no private keys. This can only be controlled through HydraDX's governance. Step two, HydraDX governance launches a fast-track referendum, which is enacted within 3 to 4 hours. Step three is trading. So once step three is complete, the token becomes tradable within the Omnipool, and the sender, so for in this example, it would be a project's sibling account, is set as the LP position holder, so it can control that position via XCM transact calls. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of why the Omnipool is the best place for your Treasury to park some of its native token, let's have a quick look at very cognizant of time. Let's have a quick look at some of the other features that a Treasury can leverage. So DCA, our DCA or dollar cost averaging palette, which is set to be released soon, 3 weeks, allows for the execution of orders over longer periods of time. This has many direct benefits for the DAO, as well as all their supporters, basically by allowing a better price execution over time. So if we look at an example with a low fee environment like Hydra offers, it allows for a large number of smaller transactions at a very little cost. So if you compare a 10,000 DAI to DOT swap with, right now in the Omnipool, you'd have over 2% price impact, or you could do 1,000 swaps of 10 DAI to DOT, which is essentially 0% price impact, and would cost all of $10 in fees. This is also a really useful front-running protection mechanism for those larger trades, because basically it increases the cost of and therefore removes profitability of sandwich attacks. OTC. Okay, so we've all used the OTC now. We used it to trustlessly swap two assets, DAI for USDT and wrapped Bitcoin for IBTC. So this basically allows any registered asset on HydraDX to make use of our trading feature, and essentially allows peer-to-peer swapping at a predetermined price, eliminating price impact. We do have future plans to improve it, implement our order router, which would allow the OTC orders to sort of be filled if the price is favorable to the Omnipool price, which sort of gives you a crude on-chain order book. Hydrated Farms. I'll take a second to say rest in peace to this poor fellow. He's provided us with a very good meme, recently passed. But Hydrated Farms is the name affectionately given to our liquidity mining feature, which we've designed to tackle some of the main sort of pain points for liquidity mining. So typically, mercenary capital comes in, farm and dumps the token by flooding it with loads and loads and loads of capital, dumps on the heads of unsuspected late entrants. So we battle this by our loyalty curve and the structure of parent global farms and yield farms. So LP rewards are distributed and they improve over time, whilst always emitting to a fixed maximum schedule. Now, obviously, if a DAO provides liquidity to the Omnipool, they don't necessarily need to incentivize additional liquidity. But let's say if they wanted, I don't know, the fattest, deepest liquidity possible, and they want to incentivize some liquidity, they could leverage this for that, or maybe even look to as a novel distribution method to LP as another token. So I've talked to you long enough for now, so let's quickly wrap things up. So treasuries and DAOs can utilize the Omnipool to provide deep liquidity for their native token against a multitude of other assets with zero upfront capital or ongoing costs, all whilst maintaining full custody. Instead of tokens lying dormant in a treasury, they can be providing a useful service to supporters and even earning fees. Why delay? Seek hydration for your treasury today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben, for the presentation. Do have a couple questions from the audience. Just wanted to ask them really quickly. First and foremost, I thought one of them was interesting. Are there going to be fiat on-ramps and off-ramps for Hydra DX?
Yes. Oh, nice echo. Thanks to the guys at Interlay for their stellar work on the Bankster proposal. Both Basilisk and Hydra will be getting Bankster direct fiat on ramps. So yes, that is in the works. We're on the list.
All right, sounds good. And then another one that came up was Limo wants to know why you don't have a lampshade on your bulb behind you.
So basically what happened was we were moving the rooms around, and then the need for the room changing didn't take place in the end. So I've haven't finished, because I think, Funky, you mentioned before that I don't have any things on my walls, and it was driving me crazy. So yeah, I haven't got around to that yet.
We've answered a lot of the other questions that came up in the chat during the presentation. So thank you so much for being here, Ben. I think everybody's super excited about what Hydra is doing. So